Journeys. We've been doing this for a little over 2 years, and we've grown our co-hosts. So we have several co-hosts now to help us put on even more awesome events, and we do this all entirely voluntarily. So we just want to share our knowledge, and I think at one point we had this thing where we were saying inspire, not teach. So we really want to inspire you guys to keep going and doing your job every single day. We do this all on our own time and money, so to support our website and help us bring more events, we'd love if you gave us a tip. It says buy us some coffee, and sadly we don't have time to go to Starbucks, but we just pour this back into the website. So we do this because we love to do it, but we'd love your tip at the same time. And the next event, ooh, gosh, it's been a while since I did an event for Coaching Agile Journeys, but it's actually on me now. So October 1st, we're going to talk about the role of project management in an agile environment. So yeah. And
tickets are going fast for that event, so register quickly. It's very popular.
Register quickly. So go to coachingagilejourneys.com, of course, to see all of our events. But I just want to talk a little bit about Bob, because a couple of years ago, when I was speaking at events, it was a Project Management World Business Analyst Summit, and met Bob, and I think I still have that pen with the blue hair on it, and we got to chatting, and it just felt like we had something, like this connection where it wouldn't be the last time. So I went back to that conference, and sadly we missed each other due to a snowstorm, but I reached out to Bob because I had taken his online class, Influencing Without Authority, and I just thought it would be so awesome to share with all of you guys. And so without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Bob, the BA. Welcome, and thanks so much for doing this for our community. We so appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Heidi. How's everyone doing? Chime in. Let me know what's going on. Isaac there is going to be taking all your questions today, and I do encourage lots of questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. And I'm also going to be taking a slightly different approach to the topic today because I'm an industry insider. And that means I've got some special information. I look at things a little differently than maybe the typical book does or what you typically see at conferences. And maybe at the end you'll still say, well, that was very typical, but I'm going to try and put my twist on it regardless. So thank you very much for having me in today in your offices, your workrooms, wherever you're at. I'm coming to you from downtown Burbank. No, not really. I was just influencing there. I'm coming to you from my office in Maple Grove, Minnesota, one of the 50 best cities to live in America, according to the studies. Notice how we've been influencing the second we opened up our mouths today. Get in. Tickets are going fast. And actually, I'm glad to hear you guys are doing a thing on project management in Agile because people are trying to figure it out. We've come so far from the original days of Agile saying we don't need PMs, we don't need BAs, we don't need this. Oh, well, we do need some of these things occasionally. And we have to figure out how all of this stuff works in the environment. And that means we're going to have to influence a lot. So the reason why I call this Influencing Without Authority, Key Insights from an Industry Insider, is I spent my first 20 years in corporate America working for Fortune 50 environments, the biggest of the big. So we're talking tens of thousands of employees where you have so many levels of hierarchy and you're banging your head against the wall because you can't ever get anywhere. And so you have to influence constantly, and you're always looking at ways of working the angles, trying to get what you want, but doing what's right for people. And it's not easy because we know how slow it moves in those corporate environments. And even if you're not in a Fortune 50 company, it's really the same thing where you're at right now. And we definitely want to take an agile twist with all of this. So before we get into too much, I just wanted to show you some pictures of influence that I found rather humorous. Now, when you look at this, some people are instantly influenced thinking, oh my God, what a terrible mother. Others are thinking, oh my God, what a genius mother. Look at her ability to multitask and get everything together. I personally see that as just something disastrous waiting to happen. Like everyone's going to fall and get hurt. And it depends on where you've grown up and what your influences were. I mean, if you work in an environment where, bikes and scooters are the norm and there are millions of people, they are not even remotely bothered by this picture. Other people might find it a little obnoxious.
Hey Bob, we can't see the screen share.
Oh no, really? After all that, I've been talking and talking and talking, and there's no screen share.
We just thought you were building up to it, and we're about to shock us with one big image as you were getting there.
Well, that's a problem. Well, let's see here. I gotta figure out. I got lots of pictures. Where is my screen share?
Green button on the bottom of your Zoom.
Yeah, that's easy to say. I found Isaac at the bottom. Found my calendar. Where did all my... Oh, now it hid everything.
Sometimes it disappears.
It did disappear. And I'm
hides on the edges.
Desperately. All right. It's giving me everything about audio and picture.
You don't see a green button.
Are you on a Mac?
I am a Mac.
Oh.
If you hit Shift Command S, it'll share.
All right, Shift Command S.
And now you have some options from which to choose. Did that
That
work?
allowed me to save my presentation.
Go. Put
I guess you had to be in Zoom.
Yeah, put the Zoom in focus.
Right.
That's a good. We should write that down. Shift Command S.
There.
Hey, good pro tip.
That was awesome. Thank you to whoever had that.
No worries.
That was brilliant. Well, now that we've been influenced that I'm a complete moron for knowing not how to work the tool, I never said I was that technically savvy. So, but I am an industry insider because I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing corporate work like many of us for about 32 years now. Now I'm going to share with you a picture of influence that maybe it will make sense. Can you see her now? Right? Now you might be appalled thinking, wow, she's risking her children. Other people will think she's brilliant because she's multitasking. I am risk averse, so I just find this to be a bit much. Plus the little girl, the way she's hiding, I think she's going to have a knee-jerk reaction at some point. I don't know. Here's another picture. This is telling everyone to do the wrong thing. I saw Lori's reaction there with her hand went over her face like, no. I mean, some people just, stupidity flies. And the problem is it influences people. Like this is an okay thing to do. Only at Walmart, right? Look at the handcuffs. Now, funny story, as a child, I was hooked up to a dog harness as a child. That is how my mother controlled me in the grocery store. So that would have been back in like 1970, long time ago. I'm sure she got a lot of stink eyes for that. This is one of my favorites. You just have to read it. The influence level here of this person, he's quite desperate to be dated, but he's putting it out there. He's trying to influence, so I got to give him credit. Oh, actually, maybe I assumed it was a guy. I think only a guy would probably do something that dramatic, but I would be totally influenced to drink this. This was actually cough syrup back in the day. And we wondered why people had problems. Chloroform. They're drinking chloroform, folks. And then, of course, the infamous pickle-flavored toothpaste. And you talk about influence, like why would anyone ever want to put that in their mouth? So one of the things we have to recognize is whether it's a product or it's an effort or it's just people in a room, influence is happening everywhere all the time. The problem is when you want something, generally we don't get to do it right away. It's a little harder than that. Now here's the thing. We've gone agile. Isn't influence supposed to be easy? I mean, think about it. I mean, the whole point of Agile was to improve morale, get to certain iterations. The team comes together, and we all know the principles of Agile. But I actually have found that influence has become harder. And this is where I want our first interaction, and I want to talk to you guys. Why is getting it in the way? Well, that's a great grammar there, Bob. What is getting in the way? What is getting in the way? Why are we not able to influence in Agile environments? What's so different about Agile compared to Waterfall, Incremental, RUP, Spiral, all the rest of them? So chime in on the chat or take yourself off mute. Whoops, sorry, don't look at that. I got a touchy mouse.
Well, I find that people, at least where I've worked, they now think that everybody has an equal weight of opinion. And so there's no clarity around who's supposed to be making a decision now.
Right? Yeah, so that gets down to expectations around communication. And if we even look, more on a global scale of what's happening in our country, everyone thinks they have an equal weighted opinion. All we have to do is look at Twitter every day. So I think that's a great insight. What else, folks? What's getting in the way? Why are you not able to influence in an Agile environment?
We've got some people in the chat. Everything is moving faster from Heather, and product owners are doing BA work.
Yeah. And so we have a different way of looking at roles that people are not used to. And sometimes there's hybridization occurring that creates communication problems. The speed kills, right? Supposedly. But, Agile was supposed to build in safeguards to that. Like we were supposed to only work 40-hour weeks to handle the speed so we don't burn out. Well, we also know that doesn't work for a lot of organizations. So sometimes not all the principles that we would like to pursue and embrace match up to what we have to do. Those are great comments, you guys. What else might be getting in the way? Why is it so hard to influence in an Agile environment?
I personally think one of the challenges we face in the Agile environment is the idea, contrary to what's being over there in the chat, is that the teams are supposed to be self-organizing and empowered, and that they get to go off and do their own thing. I'm coming from a scaled Agile environment where I'm a release trained engineer. So that's one of the biggest challenges I face is the teams. You can't mess with the teams because they're empowered and they're autonomous. And
right.
So then any engagement to an attempt to influence is met with, oh, well, you can't mess with us. We're the team. So
yeah,
that's the challenge I face.
I think that's a great insight, Hank. And this idea of self-empowerment can go too far. And the problem with all communication in general is that there needs to be a certain level of common sense. Well, we know that common sense isn't so common, right? That's the problem. Common sense is a lot like deodorant. Those that need it most don't use it. But I'll just let that one sink in for everyone. I heard a tiny chuckle out there, so that's good.
Well, maybe what's happening is that there's not a clear leadership, and so the teams are self-organizing. They say, okay, we'll take care of ourselves, and then they get rigid and become almost silos again because they're responding to lack of clarity. So it's maybe a response to some of the rules are used, some of the rules are not used. We don't know which ones are used and not used, so we'll do what we think is best, and we have to get a little bit thick-skinned, and that becomes silo after a bit.
Yeah, I love that insight because I see that happening all the time. It's, and it's cyclical, and what happens is we go back to what we knew because we haven't ingrained the right habits. And this is key to influence, and this isn't necessarily in today's presentation, but to make sure everyone understands, habits are not something that's 21 days. And there's a reason why lots of companies need Agile coaches, because your habits can take up to 254 days. That's right, 254 days is the science to form those habits. So I see that happening all the time. I think that's great insight. They've gone back to the silos. They've actually reversed engineered themselves. Yeah. Other comments? These are fantastic.
I think there's a lot of companies that say they're going to do Agile and they do the practices and they do their stand-ups, but there's still all the politics and bureaucracy that existed before they did the Agile transformation. And that gets in the way a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, at the end of the day, folks, it's not that Agile is really presenting that much different, because the reality is the politics, the people, everything that existed before is still there. It's a question of, are we embracing what we should be doing as teams and getting in that habit where we've corrected these bad behaviors? And that takes a long time to do. And just for reference, I understand the bad behavior and the habit thing, because I'll come up here, I'm a big man, and I've gained and lost the same 50 pounds every year for 10 years. And I never get past the 254 days. So we actually have to not only teach teams not to become siloed again, but we have to teach organizations to get over their politics and create new habits, which means they have to completely look at the way their organization operates. It's difficult. Any other comments? Otherwise, we're going to get into some other stuff here. Those are all fantastic, though. All right. So we'll keep those in mind. And I want to point out a few things from my experience of things that are happening right now at organizations I'm working with. And the first one is proximity and communication theory. And what's interesting about Waterfall is that we all lived in our cubes, right? We all were separated, most of us. And then we started doing remote working. And then we said, well, now let's go Agile and let's start bringing it back together and be co-located. And there's a lot of us that are Agile and now we're remote. So it's happening on multiple levels, but proximity creates unique problems with influence. And it's either the proximity of being separate, non-co-located, or it's the fact that we're too close. We're too close. We're too close. And I don't know about you, I'm an extrovert's extrovert, but there are times where I just want to tell people, back off. And proximity with communication becomes very complicated. So what happens is people start influencing at the wrong time. They influence with the wrong approach. They don't understand how to communicate based off of the proximity and what's happening. And often it's just a mishmash and people shut down and they don't respond. So you actually have to be hyper aware of what happens with communication. Agile was supposed to correct some of that. We have our magic number, right? Teams not bigger than 9, smaller is better. Well, we didn't take into account that people are still a part of the equation.
Yeah, we just do it around people, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So we still see them as cogs, basically.
Uh-huh. And they can't be. People have to be people that are embraced, elevated, promoted, made worthy, all of that stuff. And unfortunately, though, when we look at the other side of it, people suck. I mean, I love people, but people are still people, and they can be very difficult. So remember, one of our things about Agile, we're supposed to choose the right team. Well, we don't always get to choose the right team. And then I think what Hank mentioned earlier, when you end up with the over self-empowerment, the autonomy that happens, that creates that other layer. So this is something I want you guys to start thinking about, because if you come to someone and you try to influence them, especially Agile teams in that moment, like when you're really close, you may not be doing what you need to do. You may have to consider the proximity and the communication theory at that moment and actually take a step back. Influence is very much driven by timing. Timing is everything. And if you look at, and I don't want to get political today, but if you look at politics, some of them are masters at timing. So just you have to think through that. Another big thing that's happening that a lot of people just kind of generically ignore is generational gaps. And a lot of people say, oh, generational conflict, it's not a problem, and that shouldn't impact influence. Well, it absolutely does, because we come from different perspectives. And just for reference, how many people out there are having any issues with another generation you're working with? Anyone want to own up to that?
I do.
Thank you. And is it a younger generation, an older generation?
I'm 47, so it's a younger generation. It's the it's part of that team thing, right? I'm the team. Leave me alone.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I'm like, there's 12 principles. Don't focus on one.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of typical. Depending on your generation, they're going to react to the principles differently, right? And if we go back, and by the way, just so you guys understand, there are 5 generations currently all working at the same time. There are traditionalists, boomers, Xers, millennials, also known as Gen Y, and now Generation Z has come onto the market. And I actually had a Generation Z in one of my classes just a few weeks ago, the very first one I've had. And boy, do they think differently. In fact, the younger millennials really don't like Generation Z. There's a lot of conflict happening there. So if you think there's conflict between an Xer, which the gentleman speaking is an Xer, and a millennial, it's going to get worse. And we need to somehow diffuse that, right? We need to find a way of getting around that. And this is not a generational conflict presentation today. I'm trying to make you guys aware that this is a major factor in influence. There will be something I'm going to give you to say, this is one of the ways of getting out of it. Anyone else struggling with generational differences?
Yeah, I actually am also an Xer, but have difficulty with other Xers and boomers and above.
Yeah.
I find the millennials to be refreshing, actually.
So I do too, and I teach a lot of millennials, and I really understand that world.
Mm-hmm.
If you are struggling with other Xers or boomers, that could be because the level of communication that they expect is different in how you operate, right? So, you know, a boomer is going to want the let's go to lunch, and I'm stereotyping here, let's be very clear, but this applies to about 70%. Based on the studies, and I do a lot of work in this area. There's a chunk of people that will expect you to communicate in a certain way, and boomers are often, let's go to lunch, let's bond, let's talk about the corporate goals, let's reinforce that. And if you want to be more, you know, millennial and in the moment kind of thing, and it's a little more laissez-faire, it's going to clash. Or if you're dealing with a traditionalist who expects you to never swear and proper grammar, and I've struggled with one of those recently, and it's like, oh my God, I felt like I was back writing my first requirements spec 20 years ago, and all I got back was red pen talking about past participles. Just mind-blowing, right? So I'm glad that a few of you are recognizing that this happens, and in order to influence different generations, it's going to add another flavor to it. Example, just a few.
Can I just make a point here? I wonder what you think about this. Because we influence whether we realize it or not, right? So the idea is to influence deliberately, not just whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm on a team where I'm the only person not 30 years old. And I just sent out an email right before this meeting, and then I got emails saying, where's the invite? Where's the invite? I didn't get the invite. I said, but I just sent the invite. And I'm like, oh, no. So 20 emails now, because they expected a calendar invite, and I expected to send them an email. So even something like that, maybe that's not even generational, but it's just a habit. And so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these, that someone will conclude something about you. And you're influencing whether you realize it or not. So that's like the funny part of this. Like part of it, you are influencing because of your generation, your perspective, your habits, whatever. And you know, you may not realize it.
Yeah, no, you're dead on. And in fact, that is exhibited of that generation. I just ran into that as well. Had a student was like, you need to send us a link so it automatically appears on my calendar. I'm like, can't you just put a thing on your calendar? Because I'm like, that's what I would have done. But if we didn't send the link, and so it's very similar. And that is part of that generation. Their expectations of how they grew up. the habits that they formed, what they were taught, right? What they experienced in that cohort will impact, and then it influences entire other groups. So you have now formed an opinion, right or wrong, indifferent, does not matter. The opinion was formed, you were influenced, right? Now you have to decide, what are you going to do with that? How do you help them change their behaviors? How are you going to deliberately influence them? And I love the fact that you said deliberate, by the way, because a lot of people don't get that. Modern day influence is not about, oh, winning friends, you know, I mean, that's part of it, but it's different, which I'm going to get to in just a second. I was going to mention just a while ago, I kept getting a response from a student, and they kept saying, oof, oof. And I was like, are you sick? What's going on? And I finally had to realize, and I had to look it up, and actually what they were doing is they were sympathizing with me. So I would tell these stories, all these war wounds that I have from the last 30 years, and that was their way of communicating. So influence is dependent on trying to figure out how to communicate. And in your example with the email versus the invite, that's another example of that. Influence, gotta love it. All right, so just to reinforce really quickly some facts about, as I mentioned, there are 5 generations. And if you look at these facts, these things are going to impact our ability to influence. So more than 1 in 3 employees over 55, 1 in 5, 65, 1 in 10 over 75. The older generations cannot retire the way they expected, so they're going to continue to work. 50% of Gen Y ends up in retail for their entire life, which means 50% of them that you meet are going to be a little grumpier than the 50% that are in IT or business environments. And the reason for that is the infrastructure was not built by the Xers. Boomers built better infrastructure. Xers, we built .com, which went bust. So the job market's not entirely the same. And now there's 5 generations. So I just want you guys to be aware of this, because this is yet another factor. And I'll talk about here in just a little bit one thing that we can do to help solve some of this. And the biggest thing for me right now, and not just because we're getting ready to put our book out called Fail Fast, Fail Safe, shameless plug, but influence is very difficult to do if you don't work or live in a culture that embraces failure. And one of the things about Agile and its intent is to help us understand with these micro iterations that it's okay to explore and fail. But how many of us actually get to do that? And then when we need something done right away, we try to influence, but the idea of trying something new or going in a different direction doesn't work, and people don't want to fail, and they don't feel like they can afford to fail. How many people feel that they work in a culture where they truly embrace failure? That's crickets, yeah. It's tough. And I get that it's tough. And this is something where I want all of you today on this call, this interactive experience, to become influencers for failure. Because if we really want to succeed out there, if you really want to be like Amazon and Netflix and all the rest of them, those are companies that truly do embrace failure. Now, we can argue about all the nitty-gritty stuff that they don't do that maybe they should, but there are things about those companies that put them ahead of the game. And granted, not everyone can work on that. Some of us work in healthcare. Some of us work in, data sciences. Some of us work in, shipping, transportation, other things where it's not as acceptable. But we have to get to a certain level. And if we don't, influence is going to be harder. So it's another thing to keep in mind. Now, of course, I want to make sure that we all understand the definition. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I think most of you probably already know this. But if you don't, I'm going to get on my soapbox real quick here. And influence, specifically, to be a compelling force on the thoughts, emotions, feelings, and behaviors, actions of people. There is no point in influencing in an environment unless you're going to be a compelling force. The point is, you want something done. You want the team to go in another direction. It means you have to be a compelling force. It's not passive. Passive is the influence of being a role model. Passive is the wait and see approach and I'm okay. But true influence means I'm going to be a compelling force to try to get them to think about it, feel it, and act on it. And I want to make sure that people understand that, because otherwise, what's the point of you having an idea and wanting them to go in another direction? Now, there is one thing about being a compelling force that's very important. You're doing it for the right reasons. You're doing it for the good of the people, the good of the organization. It's the right way to go. It's not about self-glory. It's not about you. And in fact, if you're going to be a great influencer, you will freely give away the credit as long as we've done the right thing. So that's always been kind of a driving force for me. And if I know it's a great idea and I'll support it and I'll move forward, I don't need credit for it. I also want to make sure we understand that persuasion, and a lot of people think that the first one is persuasion, is using communication to deliberately change the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors of people. And there is a distinct difference there. Compelling means that I will do everything I can, and if I can't do it, at the end of the day, I will walk away knowing I tried, and that's good enough. Persuasion means I won't let it go. Persuasion means I will do everything and I won't stop. And there is a huge risk of moving from influencer to persuader. And it's not something I recommend generally. But I understand that sometimes we need to be a persuader. Let's say that you have special knowledge and you know that the entire team is going to fail. And we can't afford the failure for whatever reason. So you're going to persuade them. But please be careful, because if you decide to become a persuader, there are risks associated with being a persuader. And you could get a bad rep, right? And the last piece that you need to make sure your definitions are correct are manipulation. And people manipulate all the time. And the dictionary definition says to skillfully influence, especially in an unfair manner. That's old school. Modern day manipulation, like personal trainers or people doing the right thing for people, there is actually positive manipulation. So I want you to understand that that is another choice as you approach influence, but there's great risk associated with that as well. And when people think you're a manipulator, they generally shut down and turn away from you. So these subtle differences matter in your approach of what you're trying to do. Do all these definitions make sense to folks?
Yes.
Yes, and they're very helpful.
Good. I try not to just do them right off the bat, because then we lose, context for some of the other stuff. But it's really important that I want everyone on this call to become that influencer. And I want you to think about examples in your organization of great influencers and what they bring to the table. So now that we have some definitions and we've got some problems on the board, I want to make sure that you know this is how you're going to be successful. And this is called the BET model. And the BET model stands for behaviors, emotions, and thoughts. And what it is an understanding that what we do or feel or think impacts. So the behaviors, what we do affects how we feel and think. They are all connected. Our feelings affect what we think and do, and our thoughts affect how we act and feel. So let's look at it from this perspective. If you can get people to think about it and they act on it, but they don't feel it, is it really going to be successful influence? It won't be, because they won't carry it through. They have no passion behind this. And if you get them to act on it and they feel it, but they haven't thought about it, you're headed towards total chaos. And if they feel it and think about it, but they never act on it, then it's a fail. And guess which one I'm most concerned about? I need to get you guys to feel it. I need you to think it. That's why I'm screaming with my hands on the video here, waving them around. And now I need you to act on it. And if you guys do even just one of the following 3 things that we talk about today, I will be a happy man. But I will bet that you will be more successful at influence if you understand this triangle of success. And it's something that I've lived with for many, many years. And I always know how to go back and point out, well, I didn't get them to feel it. So that's a problem. All right. Now we need to talk about what you can do about it. And I want to look at 3 specific things, and I want to leave enough time at the end for more questions. And this is my unique way of looking at things. The first thing is inferences. And in an Agile environment, it's key. How many people have heard of the ladder of inference? Probably should have done the opposite. How many people have not heard the ladder of inference? This is something that happens instantaneously, and it is integral to what's happening with influence because people form opinions. And in the example that you gave earlier about the email, I mean, in microseconds, based off of those responses, you formed an opinion, and now you're going to have to check that inference that was made. The ladder of inference was created by Chris Argyris back in 1969, I believe, which I like to say was when all the best psychology was created. I'll let you think through that one. And this is how it works. So the ladder of inference, we're going to start with observable data at the bottom of the ladder. Imagine that everything you see is a 30-second YouTube video. In 30 seconds, you only see what you want to see. Your brain stores all of it somewhere, but you basically have some kind of filter on that says, this is what I saw. And based off of that observable data, you select the individual pieces specifically that make sense to you and you focus on. Again, you're filtering out well over 20 seconds of the video. Once you've selected the data, you add your meanings to it. This is where I talk about your personal baggage. And your meanings are made up of race, religion, creed, orientation, value systems, experiences, everything that makes up who you are. And you add it to this data. And based off of what you've added, you will then make assumptions about it. Because my value system says this, based off of the data that I've selected, this must be true. Well, we already know what happens with assumptions. And as soon as the assumptions are made, we draw conclusions, we adopt beliefs, specifically on the world level, and we take actions on it, all in microseconds. It's that fast. Boom, 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 boom. I just said boom, 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 boom. Whatever comes out of my mouth comes out of my mouth. Now imagine you're trying to influence someone in a high-paced and agile environment where we're going really fast, right? And we do it at the wrong time. We don't understand the person. We have a generational conflict. The proximity's been bad. Anything could be bad. And imagine what happens with your ladder of inference. Does this make sense? People will form opinions, an inference, that may not necessarily be correct. And what happens is this gets us into that the perception is reality. I'm sorry, your perception is not my reality. But the onus is on me to correct it. And that is a very big thing if you're going to influence successfully. Real quick story. If you haven't heard the story, Joshua Bell was in the Washington, D.C. subway. So he's a world famous violinist, and he's one of the best of the best. And he's playing beautiful Bach concertos in the Washington, D.C. subway. This was about, I think, 15 years ago now. And what happens is the following. He's playing violin in the subway. You have 2 parents, get my hands here, 2 parents with their hands, with their children, and they're walking past Joshua Bell. And this is what happens with their ladder of inference. Man in subway playing violin must be homeless, must need money, must be dangerous, take kids, run, gone. And they would zoom away. All of that happened in a microsecond. And does that make their inference or their judgment wrong? No. They're being protective, but was it correct? No. And these are the problems that are going to get in your way of being able to influence, because we have to overcome people's inferences, judgments very quickly. Which means the old, that first impression really matters. Now, if they had gone over to Joshua Bell and said, hey, why are you in the subway? He would have explained to them the test that they were doing, and then he gave them tickets to his concert that night. There were thousands of people that walked by him that day. And honestly, some people did because they were used to the subway. but most did it based off of the ladder of inference. And it really proved it out because at one point, according to urban legend, he left his violin on a stool and went to the bathroom, which was I believe at the time, a $14 million Stradivarius. But the inference is, oh, violin on a stool in a subway must be full of bugs, belongs to a homeless person, yada, yada, yada. See where this gets us into trouble? So here's my personal challenge to each and every one of you. Get people back to the bottom rung of the ladder. If you want to influence, and this is one of the things that has made me successful at influencing, I always get people back down to the bottom. The only thing you can control is the data. So I want you to consider that. All right? And got to watch my time here, so I need to get through these next two things, and then we'll open up for conversation more. You also need to consider the data that you're working with. Now, if you've never used Bloom's taxonomy before or heard of it, it's actually what all education is based off of. And it's a series of steps that help us understand how to drive out our learning. The problem with it is it also points out, it's not a problem, actually the beauty of it is it points out exactly where we went wrong in influencing. So the bottom level there is remember. Remember is your noun. And a noun is going to be something like, this is a shoe, this is a shoelace. See, this is important because you didn't just have your parents that said, tie your shoelaces. The first thing they did was explain to you, this is a shoe, this is a shoelace. Then they helped you understand on the second level. And on the second level, they helped you make the connection, this is what a shoe is for, this is what a shoelace does. Then they applied on the third level how it all connected. It's going to protect your feet. It's going to help you stop running around barefoot and injuring yourself. And then you jump to the analysis of when you should or should not wear shoes or different types of shoes. And see, so everything builds on our learning, and eventually you can evaluate if it was effective and create new opportunities. Here's the reason why people are not effective in influence often. They jump right to analyze and they forget all their nouns and their process and the understanding. When you are, and I'm going to go back for a second, when you have to control data, that observable and select piece, and you've ignored the data on the remember and understand level, you're going to fail at influence. I told you I was going to come at this from a very different point of view that a lot of people don't do. People stick to some of the basics, but these are things that I see all the time. I can watch people in a team, and I can point out the failure right away between these two models. They let it get out of control. They didn't understand. You know, it's like, why are we registering? Maybe we should talk about that. And then people get heated, and then they get into conflict, and then they end up doing what, you know, happens in Hank's world, like, I'm self-empowered. I don't have to do anything you want me to do. You guys starting to see how this ties together? These are really powerful concepts that if you manage these on a day-to-day basis, it's actually going to help you work with people better. And the key for me, above everything else, and then we're going to open up and have a long discussion for about 15 minutes, I think, here, about scenarios and other stuff that you guys need to know, is currencies. How many people have heard of currencies, just out of curiosity? Raise your hand in chat, say yes, open. This, personally, I believe, is 50% of influence. Anyone heard of currencies out there?
Yeah, there's a bunch of people saying yes in the chat.
Okay, that's good. Won't have to spend too much time on it, but this is literally the majority of the time why you will be successful, but it's not a quick fix. This stuff takes a lot longer to do. And there are 5 main currencies, and there are reasons why people don't respond to your influence. And that's because you haven't bought them off their with them factor. So inspiration-based people go beyond the norm. These are people that are like non-profit, almost oriented type people. People that see the Sarah McLachlan video, the pet video, and cry instantaneously, which might be me. but they want to know that they're involved in something big, and they want to know that they're making a difference, and they want to know that everyone is doing the right thing. This goes beyond just, hey, go team, we're trying to inspire them. These are people that want to go the extra step. You could throw data at these people all day long, but if you have not inspired them, they will not buy off on your influence. And I know because I'm this type of person. You have to show me on a much bigger level how I can make an impact and show people why it's going to be important. And I want you guys to really pay attention to, because these strategies, literally, and I've been doing this for a long time, it's 50% of the work. You need to understand where this person comes from so that you can buy them. And it sounds like a terrible concept, buying people off, but people want to be reached the way they want to be reached. The same is true of a task-based person. I could just call them control-based people, but that's overgeneralizing. These are people that want to know the plan, they want to know the details, they want to know the resources, they want to know trainings happened. They need all of it. And if they have all of that, and you've given it all to all of them, then they'll actually be able to make a decision, and they're more likely to be influenced by you. But that means you have to prepare a lot. So the inspiration-based person, you have to be almost emotional and very in-depth, and the task-based person has to be very practical and a full level of detail. Then it gets more complicated, because those are the easy ones. Positional-based people are people that have generally been in an organization for a long time, or they come out of college this way and they simply crave some of these things, but they see themselves as the influencer of the organization. They see themselves as the mother or father figure to the organization. And there are good positional people and bad positional people. The good positional people will use their knowledge and expertise and visibility for the betterment of the team. The bad ones do it for self-glorification. The bad ones hoard. The bad ones create fiefdoms. And they can be very complicated to deal with. And positional people, you almost have to make them feel like it's their idea to begin with. So these types of people present very difficult challenges. And I'm betting everyone on the call today, you've just recognized either a good or bad positional person you work with. They can be very complicated. One of the key quirks about a positional person, they're completely okay with public acknowledgement. They want, tell everyone they did it. They're okay with that. And they're very comfortable with who they are. They know what their skill sets are. That sometimes gets confused with the personal currency, because these people really know who they are. And I'm betting there are several of you on the call today that is personal currency. You know who you are, you know what you're capable of, and you own it, and you would just love to be given scissors and let you run and create magic. Doesn't mean you can't work in teams, you can, but you're really good at owning things because you know who you are. The difference between personal and positional, though, is that you don't have to have all the people around you, and you also don't need public recognition. You'd be happier with money in the bank. I don't need the award. Give me some cash, all right? Another quirk about personal currency is that they are the first people to shut down in conflict. They tend to ignore other people's conflict. They'll start doodling. They might even leave a room and let people fight it out. They know themselves so well, they don't want to deal with other people's drama. And then the last one here is relationship, and relationship just is what it is. These are people that want to be friends inside and outside of work. They want strong relationships, and they expect you to have their back and you to have their back. And if you don't, and the relationship is broken, you will never likely get their trust again. So they're complicated in the sense that once you're friends, you've got to be friends for life. Now, a twist on all of this is that all of these exist within you. It's not just one. And some people are dominant with one or two, and some people are dominant with one. And so you're going to kind of have to figure people out. You're going to have to read them. You're going to have to ask questions. You're going to have to watch observational behaviors. And then you can craft a strategy to deal with that person while you're understanding your Bloom's taxonomy and your inferences so that things don't get out of control, while you're managing the 90,000 other things that you have to do to influence. And if you can do that, you've got a pretty good shot at being successful. But keep in mind, all the other things that we talked about are things that you have to get over in roadblocks. So this is just scratching the surface. By the way, I am inspirational positional, and I'm not positional by choice. I used to be inspirational personal, but because I'm on the stage so much and I'm always getting the questions, everyone expects me to be positional. I don't like applause. I don't like that kind of reward system. But sometimes you're forced into currencies that you're not comfortable with. Last thing I'm going to say about currencies, then I want to open it up to questions and comments and strategies and whatever else we need to go to, is that some people are all five equally. And I just call them purple because they're almost impossible to deal with. You don't know whether to reward them. You don't know whether to talk to them in private. You don't know whether to give them the detail or restrict some of the detail. It can be very complicated. And just for reference, the two most difficult combinations to influence are inspirational positional and positional personal. They're totally like Gemini. Every day they're like something new. So, and it happens that way. All right. So we've talked about several things, and I wanted to leave some more time here. Get your reactions to some of the things we've talked about, coming at it from a little bit different angle, and entertain the questions like, what do I do if? What happens if? Or this is how I was successful. Because we could talk for days about influence.
Hey, Bob, this is Paul. I asked in the chat, I said, you laid out like 2 or 3 diagrams and a taxonomy. There's layers here that get uncovered, and yet it's so complex, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever put those layers together in one chart?
I missed that.
I can summarize, Bob, what he was saying. Paul, you're having a bit of audio challenges. Paul and I were chatting in the chat. He said these are multiple layers, what you're talking about, these diagrams and taxonomies. And so he's just wondering if you've ever overlaid them, maybe one on top of the other, to demonstrate kind of the 3-dimensional complexity of how these build into one kind of a person, right? How they build onto a person.
Gotcha. I have dabbled, and I've been asked to do that a lot. I have not found my inspiration to go to that level because there's been so many books that have been written on influence. To that point, I do look at things a little differently than a lot of the books look at. A lot of the books look at these, hardcore plays and stuff like that. And I agree with you. These are very complex, and people are complex. And I haven't found the inspiration or the time to go to that level yet. What I do personally, though, is in a given situation, I analyze a person or a group or a department or a company, because I've had to influence at all those different levels, and try to make the best decision based off of what's happening in those layers. I spent a year doing nothing but change management and influence at one point in my career, dealing with saboteurs and champions and all that stuff, and figuring out how to deal with the lady that called me an idiot in front of 75 people with senior management in the room, and then told if I didn't make friends with her, I had no job. So I agree with you. I should do something like that because I'm the person that understands it, so I should make it easier for everyone else. So I will take that as a personal challenge someday to get that done. And I like the fact that you were looking at it that way, understanding that it should be overlaid and brought down to another level. Awesome.
Well, Bob, I got a question for you from the Slido that people have put in and a few people have upvoted, was regarding the ladder of inference. you can't see what's going on in other people's heads. So what are some ways that you would pick up on people's assumptions and beliefs quickly? Like what touchstones would you look for to quickly kind of gauge, I feel like this person's probably one of these or one of these currencies?
Yeah. So there are some things that are a little more obvious, like body language. If you're in the room with someone, like you can literally notice, like if you can see me on video right now, I'm kind of relaxed, but all of a sudden they do this. Just that little bit of tension that goes up, or the change in the arms, the shifting of the feet. Body language gives it away quite often when someone is thinking about something and their ladder of inference is getting out of control. The problem is not all of us, like Heidi is remote as they get, right, with her Florida background. And so you lose a lot of your communication ability, like up to 65%. Moravian said, more psychology from the 60s. So body language is a good indicator, but in the cases where you don't have body language, you actually have to invent ways of figuring that out. So one of my friends, Nathan, I call him the smartest critical thinker I know. And what he does is he takes a very calm breath and then starts methodically asking some basic questions very softly to make sure that the ladder isn't going up and it's staying down. So he won't make judgments just based off of how people are responding. He'll always ask the extra 2 to 3 questions to make sure that there's no opportunity for the ladder going out, because he knows that you can't always pick up. I mean, some people are also, they're just so skilled at responding in communication, they don't show a thing, and they've in their brain it's already happened. So you can't always see it. Body language is the first thing I look for, though. Tone of voice I'm going to look for. Connectedness I'm going to look for, because it's more than just audio, kinesthetic, visual. There's actually 8. I think it's 8. There's spatial and music and math and other type of things that you have to look for. How a person asks a question back to you, that's another indication of whether or not their ladder of inference is getting out of control. Or how they make this statement back to you. Because if it's declarative and to the point, they've gone there. If they're asking a question and their voice is being elevated, what happens? It's already going there. So that's why I really appreciate my friend Nathan, because he's able to calmly ask a question, and asking questions like that, that's an art form. So I can't give you anything more than that, but those are some of the basics.
Wow. Those are awesome. Those are awesome ideas. Even just that idea of just repeating it to kind of drain some of the tension out of it. That's really awesome. Okay, we'll give you one more question, and then I think we'll have Heidi wrap us up. So last question, could you share some real life examples of how you've maybe influenced others? Just a couple of quick experiences you've had.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you like my biggest failure and success all wrapped into one. So once upon a time, I was running a center of excellence for a large pharmaceutical benefit management company. So Fortune 50, massive amount of people. And I was doing it for the right reasons. And I'm trying to do a combination of grassroots and top down at the same time to get everything working. And I misread one of the power players. They actually had plurality on their side. There was more of them than everyone else, but I had gotten everyone else on board. But they still had more people than everyone else. So we had, 15 departments over here, but that one department was huge. And the person that led that department thought that I was trying to be glory seeking or win an award, or, do something just for me, and I wasn't. And they refused to play along, and they said that they were going to create their own center of excellence. Well, that makes no sense, right? So the ladder of inference got out of control. Bloom's taxonomy went down the tubes. Everything was spiraling very, very quickly. And there's 2 things I want you to be aware of in how you turn a failure like this into success. One, you have to be okay with the fact you don't need the credit and you're going to do the right thing, whatever it is, to fix it. And 2, you have to make that decision. Do I walk away or do I give it away? And the way I resolved that and influenced them back into the fold so we had one united front, I gave up my role. I literally offered them my position in the company so that they could run the Center of Excellence. And by the way, they took it. And we had a big discussion with management. And I wasn't worried about it because it was the right thing to do. And I knew that they would find me another position. By the way, 6 months later, they gave up the role because they realized it was too stressful. But we got them on board. So influence sometimes is going above and beyond the basics. You got to be willing to give it away or walk away. Either's fine, as long as you're doing the right thing for the people.
Wow, great answer. That's a good example.
Great stuff. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your time today, Bob. Super appreciate it. Isaac put in the chat, and just as a reminder, all of our previous events are up on Coaching Agile Journeys. Just click on previous events and you'll see all our recordings. So like us on Twitter and all that great stuff, and hope to see you at a future event. Thanks again, Bob. Safe travels.
I appreciate that. And if there are other questions that are outstanding, I'm more than happy to answer them. Just send them to me and I'll send them back in.
Great.
Awesome, you guys. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Bob.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.